Now welcome to another weekend ramble, where this time the topic will be...
Is Rebel Moon maybe borrowing a little too much from Star Wars?
Oh, why
Oh.
do we, why do we ask that?
Okay. So, I've been following Rebel Moon with great interest.
Following its career with great interest.
Absolutely. We know it's kind of, in a way, an homage to Star Wars, in a way, a what could have been Star Wars, because
Yeah.
this is the idea that Zack Snyder had pitched to Disney and Lucasfilm, and
I think just
ultimately...
a Lucasfilm, wasn't it? Wasn't
I think
this
it was just...
pre-Disney?
I think you're right,
Yeah,
it was just
close to
Lucasfilm.
it, but yeah.
But he had pitched this and ultimately did not get to make it under the Lucasfilm banner, so he kind of did some reworking, and it's coming out on Netflix in around a month.
Yeah, I think it's like mid-December, right?
Yeah, it's going to come
What's it,
out
the
in
19th
part
or
1,
something?
part 2,
Yeah.
December and April. But it goes so much deeper than that now. I mean, if you watch the trailer, you can see things that definitely don't resemble lightsabers.
No, they're laser swords. Totally different thing.
Definitely aren't droids with human personalities.
No, they're not droids, they're robots.
Definitely not a story about some random one person who's going to change the course of the galaxy as we know it, fighting
Lead a
oppression.
rebellion against an empire?
An empire of people who totally don't resemble Nazis.
No, not at all.
No, but it's not similar in the slightest.
No.
But in another way, is similar. Recently, there was more information about the Rebel Snyderverse.
That's a good name for it.
That's what I'm calling it for now. It'll probably change. Well, Zack Snyder's going to borrow a little bit more from Star Wars. In Star Wars, we know now that a lot of things became canon. Anything that they came out in publishing, all the books, the comics, the newer video games, anything...
You mean everything that comes out is canon, kind of?
Yes, Star Wars has a huge branch, a huge umbrella of canon material these days.
Yeah.
Rebel Moon has decided to go the same way. There are now talks of the Rebel Moon animated series, the narrative podcast, a prequel comic book series called House of the Blood Axe, and these are going to be backstories on things in his universe, possibly characters, lore of the universe, and it's all going to be under the canon umbrella.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The Rebel Snyderverse, or whatever you call that.
Rebel Snyderverse. Netflix is also working on an exclusive video game that's in development, because Netflix does do its own exclusive video games now. I mean,
But are they like
I
real
find them
video
on
games, or
the
are they
phone.
kind of like mobile little games?
it's kind of like a combination of the two. I think they're trying to get more into actual video game type things, but what they have now isn't bad. I mean, there's some interesting titles out there.
No, I think there's two ways to kind of look at all this.
Mm-hmm.
For one, is it interesting to kind of get some context around the movie? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
For two, I think it just kind of sometimes got to just start with a story and not worry about everything around it.
Right. I mean, if Rebel Moon takes off and it becomes something huge for Netflix, a huge franchise in its own,
Yeah.
naturally is the way I'd prefer to see that happen.
Yes, not forcing it, not like starting with the franchise, I guess.
Right, starting with the fact that he's got 800 ideas, he's been thinking about this project for years and years and years.
Yeah.
It's a passion project for him, Rebel Moon, and the entire universe he's built surrounding it. I get that. But don't go in there guns blazing before the audience has seen it.
Yeah, I
Is
feel
my only worry.
like I think it's cool that he has a lot of it fleshed out, right? It's not, he's thinking beyond the one story. He's trying to map out a whole universe, essentially.
Making a lived-in universe.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm not opposed to it as much as I think it's just like so much of a focus these days on franchises. Like, I forget, we saw a trailer to just this fun movie. What was the movie?
Fall Guy.
Fall Guy. It's just a silly movie, and
Yeah.
I joked at one point because I'm like, well, that's going to be the start of the Fall Guy,
Fall Guy series.
shared universe, because
Yeah.
everything is part of a shared universe.
Yeah,
even
so
though
the
it was,
next one will be the Fall Girl, and
Yes.
then Fall Family, and then
I
Fall
came up,
Junior.
I came up with Rise of the Fall Guy.
Yeah, Rise of the Fall Guy.
But anyway, my point is, like, sometimes you just tell one story, right? And if people like it, then think about expanding it. But you got to tell one good story.
Right.
Like the original Star Wars, what did it do? It told one good story, and then you moved on, and it has become huge, right? Just a
Absolutely.
global phenomenon for decades at this point.
You don't start with the franchise, you start with a single project. And if the love is there, if the fandom is there, you'll hear us cry out for it.
Yeah, and I feel like when they go this route, because there's been a lot of movies lately that like will have official comic books or official novel attached to it, and you'll read it and you're like, really didn't have a damn thing to do with the movie.
Yeah, it's about world building instead of what it should be. I mean, but they say that these are all supposed to give backstories and universal histories, which are supposed to tie into the Rebel Moon universe.
You see that? I mean, that's originally what I thought Star Wars was going to do. Like, they were going to give, like, relevant, but not required. That's become my, like, catchphrase, I guess, when it comes to canon. You don't want to force people to read the books and comics, but you want the people who do read them to feel like they have read something that is relevant to the movies or whatever else. And I just feel like Star Wars has a really hard time with that. We talked the other day about the Tartakovsky Clone Wars. That is the perfect example of how you do something really relevant, kind of important, but you don't need to have seen it. Because you had the second season, which led right into the movie, right? You see why General Grievous has a cough. You see how Palpatine gets kidnapped. You see what happens to Anakin and Obi-Wan right before they show up for the big battle. You get all of this, but you don't need to have seen it. But it's really cool if you have.
So we're hoping that this is what Rebel Moon is doing, but I still think they're jumping the gun.
Well, yes and no. What I was kind of saying is, like, that was what I was hoping when we kind of heard this announcement 10 years ago now, essentially, that everything is going to be connected. Every book and comic from Lucasfilm about Star Wars, I'm saying. And that's kind of what I was hoping. Like, they had this thing, The Journey to the Force Awakens. You're like, oh, I'm going to read this book, and it's going to go right into the movie, and it's going to make sense, and it's going to be great. And it's like, no.
No, it kind of, some of them were just giving, like, background information on characters, which is kind of what it sounds like these are going to do.
Yeah, but it didn't feel like, if I read the Rey book, right, there was a story about Rey, Finn, and Poe that came out before the movie, more of a junior novel type thing. But you read it, and you're like, you know, oh, that was interesting, and then you watch the movie, and it's like, well, that didn't really mean anything to the movie. And look, I'm not saying everything has to be connected, that you always have to do lead-in stories, and I actually don't always like that either. I know I sound hypocritical here. I like when it's done well. I hate when it's done poorly. But sometimes you can just have a story in the same universe that has vague connections to something. Like, I would almost prefer, like, if you're going to do, say, Rebel Moon's going to do a comic series, just do it's like a 5-book miniseries that doesn't really have anything to do per se with the movie, but kind of gives you maybe a feel for the universe itself. It doesn't have to use the characters and give us a backstory. Just tell us a complete good story in a 5-book, arc. And kind of introduce us to the world. I think it would be better in some respects than just like, here's the backstory to this character you're going to see, which probably won't be relevant to the movie. Well, does that make sense?
It does make sense. What's nice, though, and I double-checked this, the comic book series doesn't come out, the first one comes out through Titan Publishing on January 10th. So, theoretically, you would have seen part 1 of the 2-part movie, and then maybe you do want to go and learn a little bit more about one of the characters you've seen, and see if it adds a little more depth to that character.
Yeah, but I mean, will it add, or is it just going to be kind of this story that, like, the movies don't necessarily even factor in? I mean, a good recent example of something like this, and I know it's a video game, but The Jedi Survivor, the book, like, it had, if you don't read that, you're missing absolutely nothing.
Battle Scars?
Battle Scars, yeah. That was a book that, it was, so disconnected, the characters felt so different from both the first game and where you see them in the second game.
It was very awkward.
Yeah, that it's like, why did I even read this? It doesn't really... It wasn't like a great story in and of itself.
There were a few bullet points that pertained to some changes in between the 2 times, but
some rough
literally just bullet points.
Sure.
Oh, let me ask you about that metal arm.
Yeah, that's how, Grease lost an arm.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess.
But we didn't need that entire weird book to tell us how Grease lost it on.
Yeah, sometimes I think they try to force stories in there where maybe there is room for one, but not really. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
It's like they micromanaging every second of a character's life. I don't need to know how long Chewbacca spends in the bathroom. Chewbacca, Tales of the Refresher.
It's an interesting
example. That's the new comic right now from Marvel.
But I mean, there are times, like, say, between, obviously, the original trilogy and the sequels, we feel like we missed a story. But when you go from, say, the end of Jedi Fallen Order to the beginning of Survivor, yes, there are, obviously, the characters are in different places, but I feel like the game explained that so well, you're like, did I really need a story that did that?
And the book didn't explain it super well.
No, it didn't really do a good job.
Sometimes at the end of the book, they were all together.
Yeah, sometimes you need the bridge between stories like that, and sometimes you really don't. And I feel like we always get the ones we really don't need.
Well, that's because it equates to dollar signs, but people aren't missing out. Because once people are missing out, it becomes required to pick up a comic book, to buy a book, then you're going to have angry people.
I agree. Like I said, relevant but not required. It's a hard line to toe, but I think you need to if you're going to make these books actually worth reading.
It has to be relevant enough to be worth my time and my money to pick it up and read them, and to go through that little extra to be like, I wanted to know everything. Let me know everything. It has to be worth it for me to read it, but it also can't be so over the top that somebody else not reading it or whatever
exactly.
They haven't figured out that balance. Because right now it's the reader is getting little to nothing out of it.
Yeah, you need a story. Sometimes you just don't get a story out of these books. It is literally just kind of this filler where you get like this slice of a character's life to, some way bridge the gap between two different stories. And it's just like, it feels so forced that you're like, it doesn't work. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that makes sense or not again, but...
It does. Because that's what they're doing. They're forcing you to learn every second of every character's life, no matter how inconsequential it is. Or they're overblowing and filling their life with so much stuff to tell a fun and interesting story that you're like, is this even humanly possible?
The Star Wars comics are just so... the mainline series, the flagship series from Marvel right now, of Han, Luke, and Leia have done a billion things, but between all these films, and you're like, it just doesn't feel real anymore. Not that obviously Star Wars is quote unquote real, but you get what I'm saying. You've taken these characters and just given them like all these different experiences, and you're like, they just don't mean anything anymore. Every day of the week, they're getting caught by the Empire or having to deal with Darth Vader, and you're like, this just doesn't work.
Then you watch him in the movie after all that was supposed to take place, and you're like, why is Luke still a noob here? He's done so much.
Yeah, exactly the problem. Like you get this story where you feel like something where they try to imply something important has indeed happened, and then you watch the movie and you're like, well, he didn't take that into account. He didn't grow from that experience. But getting back to it with Rebel Moon, like, just make one good movie.
Start there.
Just make a good movie, or two good movies, since that's how it's going to be broken up into two, and then talk about branching out. Just get one story under your belt.
See how the fans all take it first. Because if the fans come out and say that they do not like this, that maybe it's just a generic Star Wars and there's nothing original into it, that nothing that grabs an audience and makes them enjoy this, you're not going to sell these comic books. You're not going to get people to tune into an animated series if nobody likes the project.
Yeah.
So slow your roll.
Yeah, I think slow your roll.
Give us a little moment to breathe. I get it that you're trying to go guns blazing to make an entire franchise first, but you got to slow it down.
All right, well, I think that's going to be all we got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below. Tell us what you think about how to build a franchise. Start with one good story, or start with a master plan and weave your web early. Whatever the case may be, though, leave those comments below. Let's talk some Star Wars or some Rebel Moon. And until next time, thanks for watching.